Satoru Gojo is a character who won over many hearts since his introduction in the series Jujutsu Kaisen. We quickly learned that he is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in the second chapter of the manga, and multiple times he is stated the strongest character. Again, and again, and again. We even know that when all of his friends were asked who Gojo was, they all responded with, the strongest. But is that all Gojo is? Does Satoru Gojo have deep meaning as a character, or is he just another stereotypical strong guy with shallow writing? Let's get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. So on the surface level, Satoru Gojo is only known as the strongest by his peers and people within the Jujutsu society. We sorta know that normal humans have an idea of who Gojo is. When Shibuya was popping off, we saw that some people in the crowd were actually yelling for Satoru Gojo to come save them, and we also saw some other people respond with who is Satoru Gojo. So we know that Gojo isn't like this worldwide known figure. He's not even that known within Japan, as normal civilians didn't even actually know who he was, just a select few. But within the Jujutsu society, it's really hard to miss Gojo. He is the strongest person that they have, because we know there's this war between Jujutsu sorcerers and the evil curses that pop up everywhere, and no matter how strong the curse is, from grade 4 all the way up to special grade, Satoru Gojo will be able to come beat it and save the day. Gojo is so known that when Yuji tried to act as a mole when meeting with Hikari, Yuji actually acted like he didn't know who Gojo was, and that is how Hikari found out he was lying. Hikari said that all sorcerers know Satoru Gojo. Even when Gojo was born, he tilted the balance of the earth just because of how strong he is. But what exactly is Gojo? Is he just the strongest? Are there themes within his character that actually have meaning? Well, we sort of get an idea from this with his interactions with his students and his friends that he cares so deeply about. Back in Hidden Inventory, when Gojo and Geto were only 17 years old, they had to fight against Toji Zenin, who was known as the Sorcerer Killer. Now, ultimately, they do end up defeating him, but Toji actually had a son that he told Gojo to take care of, and that son we know of is Megumi Fushiguro. Now, one thing that people overlook when Gojo actually took in Megumi is that Gojo was only 17 at the time. It's not like he was an adult and knew how to just raise a child. And at the same time, Megumi didn't even know what was going on, because Megumi doesn't even remember his father, and some random guy is just coming up to you saying that he's now going to take you under his wing, that being Gojo. And the best part about it is that Gojo didn't even have to accept Toji's offer. This was the guy who just tried to kill him and very nearly did. And on Toji's deathbed, Gojo actually respected his wishes and went to go look after his child. And we see as Gojo is talking to Megumi, he tells him that he'll take care of things, but Megumi's going to have to work extra hard, and that he better get strong so he doesn't fall behind. And this entire thing of telling Megumi to get strong and not fall behind is actually a deep part in Gojo's character, because he wants to raise a new generation of sorcerers and one day have them as strong as he is. After Yuji supposedly dies, as Gojo is sitting in a room with Ichichi, he tells him, "I'm going to reset this crappy Jujutsu world. It'd be easy to kill everyone who's in charge, but someone else would just take their place, so nothing would change. And it's not as if people approve of massacres anyway, so that's why I'm turning to education. I need strong and intelligent allies, I need to foster them. To that end, I'll sometimes assign my missions to them. They're all great, especially Hikari and Akotsu. They'll be as good as me someday," and Yuji was no exception. So Gojo is telling us right here, only chapter 11 in the manga, that he actually does have motives, he actually does have a character. He doesn't just care about defeating curses and being the strongest guy of them all. He actually wants to raise a new group of sorcerers and have them all be as strong as he is. Because he's not just like a normal sensei in a way that he just teaches his students abilities so they just get strong. He's not only teaching them just abilities, but also philosophies, because he wants to lead this new generation in the right direction. And if you notice, only here in chapter 11, Gojo said Yuji was no exception. But at this point in the story, the entire plan was to execute Yuji. Yuji was only alive because the higher-ups wanted him to eat all 20 of the Sukuna fingers before they executed him. And Gojo even told Yuji that himself back when Yuji joined the school, that once he ate all of the fingers, he would execute him. But now we know that Gojo was actually lying. He actually did care for Yuji the entire time, and Gojo didn't agree with the higher-up's decision of just executing him. Deep down, he always had the plan of saving Yuji and taking him under his wing. But this isn't the first time that Gojo had given a problem child a chance. We know that back in Volume 0, Yuta was the original problem child that Gojo had to deal with. You see, Yuta had an extreme case scenario of a vengeful cursed spirit. He had Riko Orimoto, who actually turned out to be a special grade cursed spirit that was attached to Yuta. And Riko was basically devastating. She was super powerful, so powerful that even Yuta himself, not being a sorcerer, was given the title special grade at the time. And there were only 3 other special grade sorcerers, Suguru Geto, Satoru Gojo, Yuki, and the 4th now being Yuta Okotsu, just because he had Rika. And the difference between Yuji's case and Yuta's case is that even though Sukuna is a bigger threat, Yuji only had a couple fingers of Sukuna in him at the time that the higher-ups made their decision, whereas Yuta already had this full Rika form that was already on the level of a special grade, so he needed to be treated differently. And the problem with Rika is that she's unpredictable because Yuta doesn't actually have full control over her yet, and that is why the higher-ups actually hate Rika so much. We see that one of the higher-ups is questioning Gojo in a room, and he says to Gojo, "We left Okotsu with you precisely to prevent this type of situation. No excuses, Satoru Gojo." And Gojo says he wasn't planning on making any. The higher-up just basically goes on to berate Gojo about letting Rika come out, and Gojo just tells the higher-up to give him more time because they need to be patient with a curse as strong as Rika, and that maybe if they can understand the problem that Yuta is having, it can be solved. And before Gojo leaves the room, the higher-up says to him, "Don't forget, Yuta Okotsu's secret execution has only been postponed." And Gojo says, "If it comes to that, don't forget I'm on Okotsu's side." Now there are a bunch of cool things about this scene, but one of the best parts is that Gojo says he doesn't want to become like the higher-ups. Trying to take away the best years of your youth like that, there's no way I'm going to let them do that, no matter who you are. So not only from the conversation with the higher-up we learned that Gojo doesn't waver when it comes to protecting his students, but he also values the youth that they have, and that even though the higher-ups look at Yuta as a danger to society, Gojo actually sees the good in him and the potential that Yuta has. Because Yuta isn't just the cursed spirit that is attached to him. Yuta Okotsu is a human, and it seems like Gojo was the only person around that understood that. And we know that Gojo is 100% serious when he says that he'll take anybody under his wing, no matter who they are. Because think about the 3 main people that he's taken in so far. Megami was the first when Gojo was only 17 years old, and Megami was the son of the guy who just nearly killed him. Then he took in Yuta, who was somebody who had a special grade cursed spirit attached to him, but he didn't care anyways because he wanted him to grow stronger. And then we have Yuji, who literally has the most infamous curse in history residing in his body. And even after only knowing Yuji for a couple of days, he actually cared for him and wanted him to grow stronger. These are just 3 cases of students who were in some of the worst positions you can think of, and even though everybody else, including the higher-ups, would have been terrified of these situations, Gojo embraced them. He viewed all of these students as people who could be cared for and turned into something good, rather than just looked at as monsters because of the things that were attached to them. Which is one of the things about Gojo's character that people who aren't really into Jujutsu Kaisen might get the wrong idea about. Because the way the Jujutsu Kaisen fans actually portray Gojo is that he's just this strong guy that can beat everybody. You know, even people were saying he can go beat Goku. But people don't actually bring up the parts of Gojo's character that have meaning. So when other people who don't know much about Jujutsu Kaisen hear about Gojo, they just assume he's another strong musclehead that doesn't have deep philosophies. But in reality, this is the exact opposite of who Gojo is. Gojo is actually one of the most selfless characters there are. It is the persona that fans prescribed to Gojo that actually had people thinking that it was the other way around. You know, as it seems today in the manga, everybody who has a close relationship with Gojo has a sensei-student relationship with him. But this wasn't always the case. You see, back in Hidden Inventory, he actually had a best friend, and his best friend's name was Suguru Geto. Now we know that Geto eventually led a war against the Jujutsu Society, and then he had his body taken by Kenjaku, but before all of this, he was just a good friend. And not only that, he and Gojo were known as the two strongest people around. You know, there's this strongest narrative that is built up about Gojo, but back in high school, this wasn't always the case, because he had a good friend who was just as strong as he was, Satoru Gojo. And their entire storyline is honestly saddening and very deep, leading from when they were in high school together all the way to Volume 0, which was about 11 years later. But the most important part about that storyline, especially in high school, is that back then, Gojo had somebody that was his age that he could rely on. Not only for fights, because, you know, Jujutsu sorcerers are meant to fight and beat curses, but he also had somebody to rely on emotionally, because there is a burden that comes with being the strongest around, and together, he and Geto took on that burden. The main burden is trying to save everyone's life from curses, when in reality, you can't. You know, you can try to save as many people from curses as possible, but at the end of the day, some innocent lives are going to be lost, and that brings on grief or even sometimes sadness from the sorcerers who weren't able to save them all. And Gojo didn't have to deal with this grief alone, he had Geto right there with him. And also, as you are being called on for these missions, people just do look at you two, Gojo and Geto, as the strongest. They're not really worried about what you enjoy doing or how you spend your free time, because you're always one call away from going on any mission to save somebody, no matter how dangerous the mission is. Take the Toji thing for example. Remember how the higher-ups reacted to Yuta and Yuji? Do you actually think they would have cared if Gojo and Geto died that day? The only thing the higher-ups would have cared about is the loss of strength. You know, losing Gojo and Geto means losing strength, but they would not have cared emotionally for the loss of Gojo and Geto as human beings. They only would have cared for the loss of Gojo and Geto for their power. And do you want to know the worst part about this job? You're invisible. The real society that you're protecting all this time doesn't even know who you are, because you come and beat curses that they can't even see. To the Japanese society, these curses don't even exist. These deaths are just marked as random. So these curses, this idea that there are cursed spirits killing people, only the Jujutsu society knows about this. So even though you're saving people's lives every day, nobody will ever recognize you for this achievement. The people whose lives you are saving hold no thanks for you because they don't even know that you're doing it. So you can't even get praise in a field from the people you are saving because you're meant to stay invisible. Now imagine going through that and you only have your friend to rely on. And not only do you only have your one friend Satoru Gojo to rely on, he ends up backstabbing you and leaving and starting a war against you. So at this point, you have to deal with all of the burdens beforehand by yourself. I mean, can you imagine? Just think about everything that happened all the way up to the end of Volume 0. You nearly die in a fight against Toji Zenin, you end up taking his child Megami under your wing, and then your best friend goes rogue, kills a bunch of innocent people, and leaves the Jujutsu Society. All of the burdens that you once shared are now on you, and you're now taking after some kid when you are a kid yourself, which is one thing that is so overlooked. Gojo was only 17 when he picked up Megami. That's like if Megami or Yuta just popped out and was raising some kid by themselves. It would seem insane, but Gojo was able to do it, while also saving the innocent lives in Japan and taking on dangerous missions that only he could go on because once again, he was the strongest guy around. And now look at present day before he got sealed. It actually seemed like he actually had things going well. You know, Yuji was being trained and taught as a sorcerer, Megami and Nobara were also growing as well, but everything took a turn in Shibuya. Do you remember when Kenjaku put out the prison room on Gojo, and as Gojo looked into the eye of the prison room, he didn't see his own reflection? Now, I know a lot of people have their own theories on what that means, but I actually think it means that in that moment, Gojo didn't know what he was. You know, even though it seems like Gojo has everything under control on the outside, it seems that on the inside, he's dealing with an internal battle about finding out who he actually is. Because do you remember when Geto asked him, are you the strongest because you're Gojo, or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? I think that this is an internal battle that even though it sort of is behind Gojo at this point, it seems like he should have matured past it. In that moment, seeing Geto again for the first time, he didn't understand what he was. It seems like he had sort of PTSD from all of the things that happened to him, and he didn't have a clear picture of what he was. You see, Gojo getting sealed was a big event, not only because you lose a friend, but in the fan book it says that Gojo is the pillar that holds up the Jujutsu Society. Without him, everyone is basically doomed. That is how important Gojo's character is. You see, I've talked about nothing but emotional things mainly for the majority of this video, but when it comes to how important his strength is within the verse, it's almost hard to comprehend. Because he was the diversion for a bunch of evil sorcerers that were laying in the shadows. We know that even because he was born, these evil curse users began to just lie back and not do bad things. Because even though it seems like the war is between the Jujutsu Society and the cursed spirits, there's also a third thing you have to think about, and that is the evil Jujutsu sorcerers, otherwise known as curse users. And now that Satoru Gojo is sealed, they began to hop out of the shadows. It's just so crazy to think how in other anime verses you have groups, you have these organizations, or maybe just individual people who are evil, but they all are just diverted by like a main cast that is super strong. But in Jujutsu Kaisen, it's just one guy that stops all the evil. Satoru Gojo is so powerful that evil literally hides because of him existing. It's almost what Batman is supposed to be in Gotham, right? You know, Batman is supposed to be a fear for the criminals so they don't do bad things, but Gojo is like the successful version. And taking care of everybody and being so important that the entire Jujutsu Society falls apart if you get sealed has to be a taxing thing to have on your mind. Because even though you have your own emotions of what you like, you know, maybe some hobbies you have or things that people can value you for, people only look at you really for one thing, and that is your power. Which is why, honestly, if you look at Gojo and everything he has been through, from the Ghetto situation and Toji situation, Megumi, Yuji, and Yuta, it's sort of hard to believe that he hasn't gone insane by this point. You would actually believe that after going through everything that he has, you would lose it at some point, right? And we saw him sort of slip, you know, his mask of sanity almost slipped in hidden inventory, and Geto had to sort of snap him back to reality. Remember when Gojo was actually willing to kill all of the innocent people around just because he wouldn't feel anything in the moment? That was the only time you can say that Gojo's mask of sanity really fell for the first time. And this was before Geto went rogue, right? You would expect that after Geto goes rogue and all of the Volume 0 things happen, and now the modern things happen with Shibuya, that you would end up going insane, but somehow Gojo is able to keep it together. Which I do think is one thing that people do underappreciate about Gojo's character, is that he is able to stay sane through everything, when in usual circumstances, I imagine any other character going through what Gojo did would absolutely lose it. Because not only are you dealing with everything that I've already mentioned, but you're also trying to raise an entire new generation of students at the same time, and it's not easy. All of these students have extreme complications. And then if you look at the recent stuff that is happening in the manga, Gojo has returned from being sealed and he looks calm. He's going to have to deal with knowing that so many of his close friends have either died or are badly injured. And in this moment, he just looked calm. It looks like he's prepared to do what he needs to. Because we have emotions, you know, we finding out that we've finally been unsealed and seeing the things around us, we would probably take it all in. Some of us would even cry. But instead, Gojo knows that there is a mission to do. When he popped out of the prison room, the first thing he did was pull up to Kenjaku, because Kenjaku is the biggest threat to all of his friends. And then of course we know Sukuna came in and he's going to have to fight Sukuna, which is something that Gojo seems very confident about. You know, Gojo hasn't wavered one bit in knowing that he would beat Sukuna and, you know, of course Kenjaku in a fight, because he knows that it's just what he's going to have to do. There's no point in being afraid or worrying about fighting these guys when you know it's your duty and you're the only one around who really can. And I know that I can't wait for Gojo to reunite with the main cast so they can catch him up on everything. And I don't know how Gojo will react to the news of what has happened, but I know that he will harden his resolve in taking down the enemies. And for everything that I've covered so far, From the things with Yuji and Megami and Yuta, to having to deal with the higher-ups and knowing that they don't like his students that he's chosen, but defending his students anyway. You know, he is outright denying the political power that the higher-ups have for his own agendas because he believes that his agendas are better than the higher-ups. And also having to deal with the things with Satoru Gojo, your best friend who left you, abandoned you, and started a war against you, to where you had to fight along with your own students to eventually defeat him. And after everything that I've covered, when it comes to whether or not Satoru Gojo is an empty character, I don't think Gojo is an empty character. I actually think Gojo is one of the best characters in recent shonen. There is so much meaning, substance, and philosophies behind Gojo's character that it's hard to deny the amazing writing that goes into the character that is Satoru Gojo. With that being said, I want to thank you for making it to the end of the video, and if you enjoyed, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post every couple days on different topics you guys give me, and a few I'll come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.